What do you see when you're in the dark and the demons come?
I see you, Frank. I see you standing over the grave of another dead president.
That's not gonna happen. I'm on to you.
A Secret Service agent who failed to protect JFK faces another would-be presidential assassin. This week, we talk about those guys at the carnival who guess your weight, why you shouldn't tie up a dog inside your house, and James's old man TV viewing habits. Then we find out if In the Line of Fire stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody. My name is Alan Noah, and this is the Test of Time podcast, where we look back at movies from the 80s and 90s, and some other decades too on occasion, and we ask if these movies stand the test of time. I already said that I'm Alan Noah, and you are...
I'm James Brief, and welcome to our podcast. Today we're going to be talking about In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood. And Clint Eastwood, there's a man who's still the test of time. As an actor, and he's more into a director these days, and he's still making Best Picture nominees at, not every one of them. For every Bradley Cooper American Sniper he has a Richard Jewell or a J. Edgar, but he's still, the guy in the last 15 years has cranked out like 4 or 5 hugely critically acclaimed films.
It's nice that he's able to do that when he's not too busy showing up at the Republican National Convention and yelling at an empty chair. Remember that?
I do remember that. And Clint Eastwood is someone who he was actually in a franchise himself. Do you know which franchise he was in?
Yeah, Dirty Harry.
Right. I've never seen any of them. Have you?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't remember any of them, except that there's, the one famous line from Dirty Harry.
Are you feeling lucky, punk?
Yeah. And I remember when we were kids, they tried to revive the franchise with this movie called The Deadpool. But the reason I bring this up is because even Clint Eastwood, he was able to survive, a failed revival of his Dirty Harry franchise. But 2019, there were a lot of attempts to revive some franchises, but there were some major flops from some of the studios.
Yeah. There were a bunch of just epic fails at the box office. The first that comes to my mind is Dark Phoenix, which was the X-Men movie that was supposed to fix the Jean Grey story that they did in, was it X2 or X-Men 3 United or whatever?
X3, The Last Stand.
Okay.
The first 2 films by director Bryan Singer, they were setting up the Dark Phoenix saga, which is one of the most beloved and critically acclaimed comic sagas in all of comic history. It's a fantastic storyline that they totally botched with X3, The Last Stand. And somehow, the same writer of X-Men The Last Stand came back for X-Men Dark Phoenix and wrote it and directed it. Simon Kinberg, I think.
Yeah, and he's a producer who's been around for ages, and he's written a lot of stuff and produced a lot of stuff. But this was the first movie that he directed, and it was a huge flop. But people hated it. They said it wasn't good, and they had all this time to do it right, and they did not.
To be fair, he's also responsible for some of the best X-Men films out there. Days of Future Past, which that was the film that really corrected all the mistakes of the past films. There were a couple other failed revivals. There was Terminator: Dark Fate.
Right.
We reviewed the successful Terminator 1 and wildly successful Terminator 2. The other Terminator films a lot of them have been very financially successful. Terminator 3 was wildly successful. Even Terminator Salvation made some money. Terminator Genesis, my guess is that it probably in the end made some money, because how did they greenlight Dark Fate? But I think we're now at the end of the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator films.
We should have been after 2, but yeah.
I saw a really interesting take on the Terminator franchise that they could have gone in. I'm just going to throw this out there. It's that it would have been basically from the bad guy's point of view, that what the good guys do is they say, instead of always trying to send someone to protect ourselves from the Terminator, why don't we send someone back and kill Miles Dyson so that this never happens? And then the Terminator, the bad guys, they send someone to protect Miles Dyson. So it becomes kind of like an ethically gray area. I thought, that could be something interesting, but they didn't go there. Another franchise that has been revived before successfully was Charlie's Angels, this time directed by Elizabeth Banks.
Right.
She very successfully directed Pitch Perfect 2.
That was an interesting idea for a reboot. I thought that kind of made sense in our sort of post-Me Too world. And I think Elizabeth Banks is phenomenally talented. But, I know you don't watch trailers. The trailers I saw of the movie didn't seem interesting or action-packed or funny or witty or kind of anything. And it didn't really surprise me that landed with a thud.
Yeah, I'm going to guess 2002 or 2004 Drew Barrymore revival. That was 3 huge stars. That was Drew Barrymore, Lucy Liu, and Cameron Diaz. And it was just weird that they cast Kristen Stewart and then 2 unknowns. I think it's the kind of film that's drawn in by the stars.
I think that's part of the appeal, definitely. There was also Hellboy that was a flop, Dr. Sleep that was a flop, a lot of movies that we talked about the originals because of these reboots that were coming out, so oops.
Dr. Sleep, of course, being the sequel to The Shining.
Right.
I think it was a bad marketing thing. I think it should have been called The Shining: Dr. Sleep or something like that. A lot of people did not connect those two.
The Shining 2, The Shininger.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been better than Dr. Sleep. There's another huge one coming in 2020. They're trying to revive Ghostbusters, and that's going to be the second attempt to do that. So we'll definitely talk about that at some point, not today. And let's get into 1993's In Line of Fire.
Sure. So this movie is about aging Secret Service agent Frank Horrigan, who still feels guilty about not being able to save President Kennedy in 1963. In the present, Frank crosses paths with a man named Mitch Leary, a former government agent who wants to kill the current president. Leary turns his assassination attempt into a game with Frank and makes it personal. Meanwhile, Frank tries to strike up a relationship with Lily Raines, another Secret Service agent. Can Frank stop the assassin and get the girl? The answer to both questions is yes.
We were talking earlier about how Clint Eastwood is still, he's at the top of his game right now, even acting. He was just in The Mule last year. He wrote and directed it, so he's still doing it. But when we saw The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that was the first young Clint Eastwood film I'd ever seen. I don't know about you.
Yeah, same.
This film, In Line of Fire, may be the first film I'd ever seen of his. And to me, Clint Eastwood was always kind of like the old guy. In this film, he's the old guy. I think that maybe the second film I'd ever seen of him was Unforgiven. Have you ever seen that one?
No.
But that's a film about an old cowboy. Clint Eastwood, I think sometime around the late 80s, decided to hang up Dirty Harry and be like, no, I'm going to be like old guy. And that's going to be the career I'm going to have.
Well, how did that work out for Clint? Was this a box office hit?
This is, it's directed by Wolfgang Peterson. We've gone over a couple of his films. Can you name the 2 films that we've reviewed by him?
Neverending Story, Air Force One.
That's right, yeah. And there was a $40 million budget for this film, which is pretty high for 1993. It opened at number 3 with $15 million. I'm very happy to report that it beat the opening weekend of Weekend at Bernie's 2, which only had $4 million. And at number 1 that weekend, a movie we'll review, it was based on a John Grisham novel. Can you guess that?
The Firm?
Yes.
Okay.
The Firm. As I was saying, the film had a $40 million budget, opened kind of slow, $15 million, wound up having $102 million domestic. This thing had legs. That's
nice.
Yeah, it's like a 7 times multiplier, $176 million worldwide. It was very well received when it came in. It was nominated for a bunch of Oscars. John Malkovich, the always fantastic Malkovich, he was nominated for Best Supporting Role. And then the screenwriter, Jeff McGuire, was nominated nominated, and editing. It was also nominated Ann Coates.
Malkovich doesn't surprise me. The writing one does.
I remember the trailer for this film, actually.
Whoa.
I watched trailers back then. It didn't really show you anything about the film. It just showed 1963. That's all it showed on the screen. I think maybe red with blood or something. And it just starts going tick, tick, tick like a clock. And the 6 in 1963 starts turning. And it eventually revolves 180 degrees to a 9. And the 1963 becomes 1993. And it's basically John Malkovich's voice where he's like, I see you, Frank, standing over the body of another dead president. And then it just cuts to Clint Eastwood, and he just goes, that's not going to happen this time. And that's it. And it's just like in the line of fire. Anyway.
The movie starts with Clint Eastwood's character, Frank, and he's getting a ride from his partner, Al. And Al is Dylan McDermott or Dermot Mulrooney? Quick.
It's one of them because it's 1993, and they had to be in it.
Which one is it?
I know it's Dermot. It's Dylan McDermott.
Yes, that is correct. And Al is complaining about, sorry he's late. His kid was upset about going to a brand new school and, they just moved and blah, blah, blah. And Frank's like, don't be late. You have to be punctual. But he's also like getting a ride from this guy. So it's like if you're bumming a ride and he's a few minutes late, like you can just cut him some slack. But they're on their way to go see this counterfeiter who immediately says to Al, like, oh, help the other guys downstairs. And he means downstairs in the boat, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, boats have stairs sometimes, but I still always think it's weird to refer to a boat as having downstairs.
I don't see you as much as the naval guy, Al.
You want to see my navel?
No. So the bad guy, counterfeiter, his name is Mendoza. Did you recognize this guy?
No, but I noticed that he looked like a scumbag right away.
Right. Where you know him from. He's really, really creepy looking. And he would not be famous for another decade. That's an actor named Tobin Bell. Does that sound familiar to you?
Sounds familiar, but I don't know from where.
He's Jigsaw from the Saw films.
Oh, I have seen 0 Saw films.
Oh, okay. Well, then you totally get. He looks like a total scumbag. Like,
yeah.
He's so creepy. And he's talking to Clint Eastwood, and he's like, I got your counterfeit money for you. And they go downstairs in the deck, and they see that Al is tied up, where, his mouth is, stuffed, and there's some goons down there.
What the counterfeiter is saying is that Al was asking too many questions, so he got suspicious and he had him followed, and it turns out he's Secret Service. And I was like, wait a second. 2 minutes ago in the car, Al was complaining about his kids being upset about having just moved, but already he's been in town long enough to annoy this guy by asking too many questions. That seemed a little weird. But what the bad guy does is he says, here, I'm going to give you my gun. You shoot him. That way I know that you're not an undercover agent too. And Frank takes the gun and points it right to Al's head and pulls the trigger. But it was not loaded and Al's fine.
Not exactly. That once they realized that Frank was loyal, supposedly loyal enough to try to kill Al, they put a plastic bag over Al's head. And they're like, okay, good. Well, we still need Al dead. So, hey, Frank, while Al's suffocating, hey, Frank, let's get some omelets.
Right. And then Frank, grabs his gun and shoots the other 2 henchmen kind of without even looking. He just kind of moves his arm and fires at the one guy and kills the other guy. And then's like, no, I am Secret Service too. Which all of this is weird because then they even say later, well, how did you know that gun wasn't loaded? And Frank is kind of like, I figured. I wasn't totally sure. And that freaks Al out. But also, how did he know that the other bad guys weren't then going to shoot Al instead of putting a bag on his head, which takes a while to suffocate? What if they just pulled out another gun and shot him?
I'm guessing that was the only option he had at that point. Al is tied up, and that's the only option he has.
But that's basically just kind of like a cold open that's not really relevant to the main plot.
No, just the character, and the character of how he's a badass. And it'll be important a little later because it shows that Al's had a traumatic experience here.
Poor Al. So then Frank gets a call about some guy who's got all of these pictures in his apartment. The landlady found them, and it's a lot of things about JFK's assassination. And Frank looks at all these pictures. He thinks that it's worthy of following up. Then he does the only smart, natural thing any investigator would do and open the shades and stand by the window looking out. And then the assassin happens to be standing outside in an alleyway looking up at his apartment with binoculars for some reason, sees Frank, recognizes him. And when Frank goes back to the apartment later with the search warrant, all of the pictures, everything's cleared out except for one picture on the wall of the JFK motorcade, and a young Frank is there. And in the picture, he's been circled. So the assassin, this creepy guy, knows who Frank is.
Right, and this is where we learn the backstory that Frank is the only remaining active agent who was guarding the president, President Kennedy, that day in 1963, and he feels incredibly guilty over his failure to protect President Kennedy.
Why? What happened to President Kennedy? Is he okay?
Yeah. And the guilt drove Frank to drink excessively. Eventually, his family left him. And he's kind of a shell of the man he was. He never really recovered back then. And he kind of has this nostalgia for Kennedy. It was like a different time back then.
Right. So then we meet some other Secret Service agents. One of the bosses is played by the dad from Frasier. John Mahoney is the actor's name. There's Gary Cole from Office Space. He's like another jerk agent, Watts, and he doesn't like Frank, and Frank doesn't like him. And then there is Lily Raines, played by Renee Russo, and Frank immediately likes her and starts quote unquote flirting with her. But man, is it creepy and just bad flirting. When he first sees her, he asks her for a cup of coffee. And I think John Mahoney's like, no, she's not a receptionist. She's an agent. And he's like, yeah, I know. I was making a joke. Like, okay.
I mean, he basically does like Mad Men flirting with her because he's an old guy. He's an old school guy. I believe the line is, wow, the secretaries get prettier and prettier every year. And they're like, she's actually a field agent, Frank. I know. I was just testing her.
Right. Then they're talking about panache because the assassin called Frank on the phone and he said, call me Booth. And Frank was like, well, why not Oswald? And John Malkovich says, I like Booth better. He had panache. And then while they're talking about it with the agents, Frank says, he said he had panache. That means flair. And Lily's like, yeah, I know what it means. He's basically mansplaining to her. Anyway, basically what Booth, as we now know him, is doing is he's making this a game. And he thinks that Frank is his adversary, but he still calls him his friend. And Frank decides that he wants to be on protective detail, not just doing investigations, but like actively out there in the field protecting the president. And they put him on the detail where they're like running alongside the limo. And he can't keep up because he is older. And, you have to be kind of fit to jog alongside a car for however many miles, who knows how long it is. And there's kind of a gag after that scene where he's in the break room and he's fallen asleep and someone calls like the medics and they all come running in thinking that he's had a heart attack. And he's like, I'm on my break here. And then he tries to make light of it where he's like, who's the wise guy? And then Lily's like, what makes you think it's a guy? Did she do it? Is that flirting too? I don't know.
Yeah, and this Booth guy, there's a couple scenes, it goes back and forth where he calls Frank and then they try to trace him, and Booth has what they're calling a scrambler device, and basically it renders the tracings useless. And this is a very like 1990s thing because you would kind of assume the FBI can trace, by pressing the trace button. I need 30 seconds. Yeah, okay, keep him on the line. Like, this is what Hollywood told us, that it takes like a physical amount of time to trace it, but not this guy. He's too smart.
Yeah, that scene where they break into the wrong house, that definitely felt really wrong to me now. I think in this movie there's one person of color who is a character who has like a line or two in this movie, and then the Secret Service bust into this house of two black people and like throw them on the ground. And then they're like, oops, wrong address, our bad. And like, that's it. It's like the only black people in this movie just get like wrongly assaulted by the cops. I was like, that doesn't read so well now in 2020.
You're right. The only pretty much black person in this film happens to be the one that gets swatted. There is something I noted here that was interesting because there are some leads that they've gotten to the actual phone where he was, but he's always gone by the time they get there. And they've had some eyewitnesses, and we find out later that Booth has been wearing a lot of disguises. So people can't really describe what he looks like because they're like, yeah, they say he could be anywhere from 5'8" to 6'2", from 28 to 45 years old. But then they go, yeah, they're describing him anywhere from 165 to 180 pounds. I'm thinking, for just a lay citizen to just eyeball someone and guess their weight, a male's weight, I think everyone guessing between 165 and 180 is incredibly precise. That's what I think.
I mean, they're probably all carnival workers who like do that, guess your weight game.
Exactly.
Is that still a thing? I have been to, I guess, amusement parks. I don't know when the last time I was at a carnival, but I haven't seen one of those things in a while. It just seems like you would just get slapped all the time.
All I know is those things, when you pay the $4 to have your weight guessed, they already won. When you win the stuffed animal, you pay them $4 for that.
True. Very, very true. So then we follow Booth on this like side adventure kind of thing where he's in LA and he goes to a bank and he's trying to, I guess, set up a shell company. Basically, what he's doing is he wants to have all of this money so he can be a donor, so he can get close to the president. But he's at this bank and there's a woman who works there who's just making small talk while he's opening up the account. And she asks him where he's from. And he says Minneapolis. And she says, I'm from Minneapolis. And very quickly he's caught in the lie. She asks him what high school he went to and he makes up something that's not real. So then he shows up at her house and has to kill her because she kind of suspected something's not right. Like the earlier scene with the black people who get swatted, this also reads really wrong now, that he just follows this woman home, shows up. She's very like well-meaning and earnest, and she says that she's lonely, and then he says that he really wants to take her out to dinner, but no, he's just there to kill her. Then her roommate's also there, so he has to kill the roommate too, and he snaps both of their necks, and it's just awful and brutal and horrifically unnecessary. Also, there's a dog in the house that's tied up inside. So it's like a big dog and the dog can't help them. It's like, who ties up a dog in the kitchen?
I'm sorry, I just have a problem with what you're saying. You're like, this just reads so wrong. Murdering women. What do you think in 1993? People were just like, oh, this is just something they do on TGIF. Like, he is a sociopath. This guy's totally nuts. This woman completely would not have remembered it at all. In fact, killing her is actually probably what leads to his downfall. Because had Frank interviewed this woman 3 months later, she may not have remembered this guy. Like, this guy's totally insane. We have come to accept that murdering women is wrong. I think that's a good thing, but I think they were woke back then, Al.
They really weren't. No, I very strongly disagree with you. Later on in the movie, he kills 2 hunters. And the point of that scene is to show, once again, that he's a sociopath and kills anyone who could be, a quote-unquote loose end. Those guys are innocent, but they're also just kind of like jerky hunters. So you get the idea that he's a sociopath, but you also don't feel like horribly bad about the hunters that he kills. If it was a guy hunting with his son and he killed the son too, right, then that would be like, ooh, that takes it in a different place. Now I feel different about what I'm watching. All I'm saying is, seeing him kill this one woman and then her roommate who just shows up out of the blue, I don't think it had the desired effect of, man, this guy's crazy. I just feel like, this is like extra wrong.
I think he's crazy. He's a murderer. He wants to murder the president of the United States.
assassinate.
He does what I call the 80s neck snap, which is that in movies in the 80s and 90s, you just have to turn the neck like 45 degrees, very simply, and anyone dies.
Right. Meanwhile, Frank is kind of sort of flirting with Lily. Man, is everything he's saying wrong and creepy. They're at like some gala event and they're working as Secret Service agents. And he's like, Agent Raines, you look good enough to eat. And then he asks her to dance. I mean, it's like, no, you're supposed to be protecting the president right now. This is not the prom where you ask the pretty girl to dance with you. Then she's walking away and like, does he whistle or something? He's clearly gawking at her and he says, where do you hide your firearm? No, don't tell me. I'll just guess. Wink. I know what he's implying there, but it's like, dude, not the time or the place. He's supposed to be like really worried about saving the president's life, right? Not trying to get laid?
That is correct.
Yeah. Then he asks her for a ride later, and instead of just going home, they stop for ice cream by the Lincoln Memorial. And he says that the only reason she was hired is to court the feminist demographic. And she's like, oh, well, what demographic are you appealing to? And he says, I'm a heterosexual white man over the age of 50. Now, technically, that's true. This movie came out in 1993. He was born in 1930. He's 63 when this movie comes out. He does not look like he's in his 50s. Yes, technically, if you are in your 60s, you are over 50. But if you're 63, you wouldn't say I'm over 50. You'd say I'm over 60.
When I heard that line, I really felt like that was something that was an agent had told Clint Eastwood. Like, Clint, you appeal to heterosexual males over the age of 50. Like, he was kind of smirking when he said that line. I kind of felt like there was something real to that.
I guess all of it just seems really creepy, especially because of the age difference between him and Rene Russo. I guess they sort of are acknowledging it with kind of a wink, but it just still feels like really bizarre.
I did think it was decent casting of Rene Russo because Rene Russo is nearly 40 in this film when she's cast. I believe she's 39. And I just thought it was a little more appropriate because I would have expected a movie to make, a Winona Ryder in 1993, a beautiful 24-year-old agent just out of the academy. I did think it was more appropriate than they could have done. Like how Tom Cruise always has a 24-year-old co-star.
Right. I hear what you're saying. I mean, I guess so Clint Eastwood and Rene Russo are 24 years apart, so that could be worse. I think that Rene Russo looks pretty young in this movie. I'm surprised to hear you say that. I would have guessed like early 30s. Clint Eastwood looks to me like late 60s. He's 63 in this movie. I would have guessed older. Maybe I'm just bad at guessing ages. I guess I shouldn't get that job at the carnival where you have to guess people's ages and weights. But eventually, Frank and Lily do hook up. And that is kind of a funny scene when they're in the hotel room and it's just like a camera pan of like their feet and the clothes kind of coming off. And you just see all of their stuff hitting the floor, the handcuffs and the gun and the walkie-talkie and all the equipment and everything, his stuff and then her stuff. And it all just kind of thuds onto the floor and they're in bed. And then she gets a phone call and she has to leave. And then Frank has a pretty funny line where he's like, damn it, now I gotta put all that shit back on. I like that. I thought that was pretty funny.
It's better in Gran Torino, but I love curmudgeon-y old Clint Eastwood. I think he's fun.
Right. So meanwhile, there's also still this back and forth going on with him and Booth. One of the times that Booth calls the Secret Service office, he's across the street and there's like a chase on foot. Booth is hit by a car. He puts his hand on the car and then Frank impounds the car for evidence because they've got his print. It turns out that the print matches, but it's classified, so they can't tell Frank who it is. Then the president's at a campaign event and Booth is there, but he doesn't shoot the president. He just pops some balloons and Frank has the flu. The room is spinning and he's all disoriented and he gets taken off of protective detail. Eventually, they do find out that Booth is Mitch Leary, who is a government assassin. I forget what they say, like the term was for it. Do you remember?
Like a wet man or something?
Something like that. he's been trained to kill and Frank has been trained to protect. And in one of their phone calls, Leary is like, oh, isn't it ironic? And Frank's like, it's not ironic.
I kind of thought it was cool, like just kind of seeing it and making my own little backstory, like that he's basically a Jason Bourne, kind of like this is what happens when the Jason Bournes go crazy and like 20 years later resurface.
Right. And, Frank is still on board with going after this guy. He's made it personal. Leary was talking about his wife who left him and took their daughter and all this stuff. And Frank just wants to get this guy and prevent him from killing another president. Meanwhile, Al, who has kind of been out of the main story for a while at this point, says that he needs to quit the Secret Service. He's having nightmares from that thing in the beginning of the movie. He's like, that's it. I got to quit. I'm not made for this. And Frank at one point says, you stop this cockamamie shit. And I made a note of like my things that don't stand the test of time. He says cockamamie. But then Frank even says, that word really hasn't picked up in your generation. Cockamamie. Maybe you should say cockamamie. Ha ha ha. Meanwhile, if you've ever seen any movie ever, when the guy says that he needs to quit because he's not cut out for this line of work and his partner begs him to stay, you know what's going to happen to Al.
Yeah, there's a chase and they meet Booth and they wind up chasing him onto the rooftop. And they're jumping from rooftop to rooftop. There's a big gap between two of the buildings, and Booth, now we call him Leary. Leary barely makes it. So Leary is at least depicted to be a little bit younger than Frank.
Yeah, definitely.
And Frank tries to make this jump and he does not make it. And he's hanging and he's slowly slipping, and Leary appears out of nowhere and goes, Frank, give me your hand. I'll save you. Like, if you don't give me your hand, you will die. There's a great shot where the camera's over Malkovich's head. You're looking down at Clint Eastwood, who appears to be hanging from a ledge. And you go, oh, this must be a blue screen or something. And Malkovich's sunglasses fall off his head, and you watch these sunglasses fall behind Clint Eastwood. Like, you see him fall like 2-3 Mississippi, and then they hit the ground. It was a really cool special effect that made me really realize like how close Frank is to death. But Frank does give him his hand, and Leary, because he does see Frank as this adversary / friend, he does save his life. He swings him down to a balcony, so far enough away so that he can't catch Leary. But then
Al comes over and says, freeze! Doesn't shoot, because why would you want to shoot the guy who's planning to assassinate the president?
He goes, freeze. He's looking at him. He aims the gun at him. And then Al is kind of really like, look what I did to like the veteran. He goes, I got him, Frank. And he did something very stupid, like a rookie mistake. He looks at Frank and he's like, Frank, I got him. He took his eye off Leary, who you could see his hand was hidden and his hand has a pistol. And when Al looks away, he gets it between the eyes.
Yeah, poor Al. So then the president, who, by the way, they call Traveler, which I think is real, right? Isn't that what Secret Service agents call the president?
I thought the president gets a different code name every single president.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. If you are in the Secret Service and you want to tell us, tweet at us at TestOfTimePod. Although I guess you can't do that, right? Anyway, the president is making a campaign stop in California because it's an election year and he's losing, and the only way he can win is to win California.
I know, it's so weird. He's
so weird.
Because they're playing it like it's a popular vote. Because they're like, he's down 5 points nationwide. California's the way to bring the tide over to him.
No, they do say we need California's 54 electoral votes.
Oh, they do? Okay.
But that still doesn't stand the test of time because
Right.
California has not been a state in play
Exactly.
since,
Reagan.
I guess Reagan, it went red, right? But it's as blue as it could be now. So the idea of like, will California be Democrat or Republican? We don't know. That doesn't stand the test of time. Also, I was trying to figure out if this president in the movie is a Democrat or Republican. I think it's Democrat, but it's not totally clear. There are a few signs of like protect my right to choose kind of things, like, pro-choice kind of signs in the rallies. But then I was like, well, maybe he's a Republican and those people are protesters. It doesn't necessarily really matter, but I was just curious about that.
I thought this president is cast very well as President Generica. I mean, he's I can't even think of him, but at the same time I can't picture. He just had like silver hair. You know, he was just one of those like, okay, like well cast for that.
In the credits, they don't even say a name of President Mitchell or whatever. He's just president.
Wow. So Frank is now kicked off of the detail because of the balloon popping incident and a bunch of other stuff. And he's actually kicked off by, do you know the older gentleman that's playing he's like the campaign advisor he's always yelling at this. He's got this real southern drawl.
Yeah, he looked familiar. I don't know who it is.
So you probably recognize him from Law and Order. His name is Fred Thompson. He was actually a senator. Like a real life senator, and he became an actor.
Right. I actually don't watch Law and Order because I'm not 70 years old, but that's very interesting. I didn't know that you watched Law and Order. That's after Matlock, but before Wheel of Fortune?
Yes, I've seen an episode of Law and Order before. Yeah, I'll pass the prune juice.
Don't forget your Centrum Silver, James.
Exactly. From A to Zinc. Frank winds up, he's doing a little investigation on his own, and he does find that there's some weird stuff with some of the campaign contributions, and he winds up going to the bank, and he's like, I want to find everything that happened with all these accounts of donating to the president, and they're basically like, it's going to take a long time for us to compile all of that, and he says, fax me the answers when you have them.
Right.
And long story short, he basically winds up connecting that bank employee that Leary had murdered was the woman that had set up this weird S-Corp that was able to donate to the president, and therefore, because he had donated so much money, the presidential re-election campaigner said, Mr. Smith, for giving so much money, you get to come to this dinner. This is what I was talking about before, that I think he messed up by murdering this woman, because I don't think she would have remembered some guy.
And then when Leary is talking to Frank at one point, he says something about like, the world is cruel. Sometimes you get killed because you're from Minneapolis. And that's a clue that Frank follows. And yeah, he puts the pieces together.
Well, something we hadn't talked about is the genius plot of Leary is that he makes this composite plastic gun. And it's an unbelievably cool gun. I mean, this thing looks like it probably weighs like half an ounce. I mean, you can see how lightweight it looks. Like today, it would have been a 3D printed gun.
I had that exact same thought. Yeah.
Basically. And so obviously the fact that it's composite plastic means it has no metal parts in it. And she's going to be able to get it past a metal detector. When you go past a metal detector, what do they ask you to do?
Take out your phone and keys.
Right. And back then, of course, it would have been only keys. And he takes out his keys, and on his keychain, what does he have on his keychain?
Keys?
A rabbit's foot on his keys, a keychain.
Right.
So he's able to smuggle 2 metallic bullets inside the rabbit's foot. And of course, the rabbit's foot is outside the metal detector. So it could have been something a lot more lame. But I thought they took the time to show us how cool that gun was.
I agree with that. But the problem with this plan is that it requires Leary to assemble the gun while he's sitting at the table. And there's a shot of him doing it like underneath the tablecloth. He's like putting it together while he's not looking and making small talk with the women sitting next to him. And all I'm thinking is, these women who are sitting next to him are probably thinking it's weird that this guy has both of his hands under the table and is clearly moving them around his crotch. I feel like it must look like he's masturbating. It's got to.
There's a lot of stuff that I feel like a lot of the people there are all smiling at each other, and it's all just one big illusion, because there is a great shot where Leary is talking to the head of the re-election campaign and a couple other people, and Leary is talking about what he does, what his fake company does. Oh, we talk about the Japanese market, and we open up the Nikkei exchange, and they don't know what they're doing at the NASDAQ. And it's all these buzzwords, and you could tell the other people, they have no idea what he's saying, but they go, oh, that's so fascinating. Like, everyone's bullshitting everyone. Like, they have no idea what he's doing there. All they're doing is thinking, this guy gave us money. Listen to whatever blah, blah, blah he's talking about for 5 minutes. Then I'll say, well, it's real nice talking to you, Jim. I hope to see you at the dinner tonight.
Yeah, I think it's easier to shake your head and nod when you think someone's just spouting bullshit than when you think they're masturbating at a table.
True. I'm wondering what you think. What do you think of the makeup in this film? I thought they did a very good job with John Malkovich, even to the point where some of his disguises looked fantastic and some of them looked like poorly done, but I think purposely well done. I think to the point where there was one guy in the park that Frank discovers as Leary because he had a gold tooth, and it's like, no man, if you want to blend in, you don't have a gold tooth. And I personally thought the makeup and costumes were done very well on Leary.
Yes, I agree with that. So Frank has figured out who Leary is. He runs into the room just as Leary has his assembled composite gun and is about to take the shot. Frank runs over. He jumps in front of the president. He takes the bullet for him like the Secret Service agent that he is. He does what he's supposed to do. There's chaos. The other agents get the president out of the room, and Leary takes Frank hostage. He drags him into an elevator. He knocks out all of the lights so that way the snipers who are there can't see into the elevator. And Frank is talking into his earpiece when Leary is holding a gun on him. And Frank is saying to Leary, take the shot, take the shot. But Lily, who's on the ground listening, realizes that he's actually talking to her, saying, take the shot. And then Frank says, just one thing, aim high. And Leary's like, aim high? What do you mean? But that's an instruction for Lily to tell the snipers because Frank is on the ground and Leary's standing up. So Lily figures it out. She tells the snipers to aim high. They do. Leary is hit. He's not killed instantly, though, because there has to be the holding him from the elevator moment.
It's a mirror image of what happened 30 minutes earlier when Frank is holding onto the ledge by one hand and then Leary saves him. So then Frank says the exact same line back to him. It's the Terminator line. Give me your hand if you want to live.
The difference is that when Leary is holding Frank, he's like, I want to save you. I consider you my friend or something like that. And then when Frank is holding Leary, Leary says, do you want to save me? And Frank's like, honestly, no, but it's my job. And Leary basically just says, I'm done. I don't want to go to jail. And he had been saying the entire movie that he was willing to die. He lets go. And that's the end of him. There's a little epilogue where Lily and Frank go back to his apartment and there's a message on Frank's machine from Leary. You hear the tape rewinding and everything. And Leary says, I'm probably dead. The president's probably dead too. I wonder if you're alive hearing this. And Frank doesn't even bother. He and Lily leave. They go back to the Lincoln Memorial.
He has that really cute last line because earlier he had said something like, he says something witty and he's able to figure something out about someone. And how'd you know that, Frank? I know a lot about people. And then at the end, he says something like, that pigeon is gonna eat the breadcrumb before the brown pigeon does. And he's correct. And Raines is like, how'd you know that, Frank? I know a lot about pigeons, too. I just thought it was a funny line delivered by Clint Eastwood.
I did not find that line funny because he says that I know things about people once or twice. It's not really that funny or memorable of a line. And it's like, it's a callback. But to what? It wasn't that witty of a line to begin with, I thought. But James, I'm curious to hear your opinion about In the Line of Fire. Do you think that this movie stands the test of time?
I think the plot of the film is somewhat not generic, but I feel like it is. I haven't seen this show, but I feel like this week on NCIS, there's a plot to assassinate the president. And
wait, you don't watch NCIS? It's on right after Law and Order.
The NCIS is CBS and Law and Order is NBC.
Oh, I'm very sorry. So then you have to change the channel and you don't like using the clicker, right? When you want to watch your programs?
Well, actually, I mostly use streaming apps to watch my shows.
Oh, aren't you a sophisticated 70-year-old?
Makes me a hacker.
Oh, wow.
You know, there's the cat and mouse thing with the bad guy toying with the police. And I think that's based on real stuff. That I think maybe the Zodiac killer, one of those notorious 70s killers used to write letters to the police and like, ha ha ha, you'll never catch me. And there's a lot of stories like this, like Frank Abagnale Jr. in Catch Me If You Can, and Die Hard 3, he does this Simon Says.
Yeah.
He's playing with him. It can be fun. The reason I think this film excels a lot more than its generic, we have to save the president's life plot, is the casting. There's no replacing Clint Eastwood. Literally, who would you have replaced him with in 1993? Maybe Martin Sheen. I mean, he's a great actor. It's not the right guy. I said it earlier. I think Renee Russo is a great cast. I think she would be better than like a 1993 Michelle Pfeiffer, Dermot Mulroney / Dylan McDermott. I think he's fine in it.
It's Dylan McDermott.
Yeah. You know, you and I know, we happen to know Fed, and from this movie, they all seem to be, blue-eyed Dylan McDermott's and, Renee Russo's and Clint Eastwood's. And I guess everyone working in the federal agencies are all, Hollywood gorgeous.
I mean, everyone in every movie is Hollywood gorgeous because it's a movie that is made in Hollywood.
No, not a movie like Hairspray.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah, that one movie. All right. Way to disprove the theory.
And the first half of She's All That, when you don't realize that she's actually a beautiful woman. She has glasses and a ponytail, Al. But I'm getting off the subject of In the Line of Fire. John Malkovich, he's so brilliant, but he's kind of like a scary guy. Maybe he's a sweet man in real life. I have no idea. But he just gives you the creeps. And this character, Booth Leary, is supposed to give you the creeps. It's well directed. I think there's a couple shots that I just thought were really cool. Like I said, like the sunglasses falling off the roof. I thought this is a film that it's better than it should be. And I'm going to say, if you do like a political thriller, I think it's a solid piece of cinema. So I'm going to say, yes, it does stand up. It has its flaws, but what do you think, Al?
I'm going to touch on one thing you just said, that it's a political thriller. No, it is not. There is nothing political about this movie. Not only did I not realize what party the president was, I didn't understand why Leary wanted to kill the president. We get backstory about Leary, that he is this former assassin and he's mad at the government. But why is he mad at this president? No reason whatsoever. Why does he want to kill the president a couple of weeks before the election? Is it worth it to do that? I mean, are you helping his opponent? Does he like the opponent? Does he want the vice president to take over? We get none of that. Also, what year does this movie take place in? Because they say that the JFK assassination happened 31 years ago. So that would make it 1994, even though the movie came out in 1993. 1994 is not a presidential election year.
That's weird.
Yeah. So there was just a lot of like stupid things like that I was kind of like, wait, hold on. Huh? I don't get it. There's some other stupid things that don't stand the test of time, of like when Leary needs to make a flight reservation and he has to call the airline to make a flight reservation. And, you mentioned the fax machine. At one point, Frank goes into a magazine shop to look for the RC hobby magazine that he was reading. The fact that when the president is at a rally and he's making a campaign speech, he speaks in coherent sentences. Obviously, that doesn't stand the test of time. There's a lot of stuff like that. It's really just creepy the way that this super old dude is hitting on his way younger female coworker in inappropriate ways, in inappropriate settings, in inappropriate locations. And she's just kind of like, well, I shouldn't. Oh, I guess I will. There's no reason for her to fall for him. We don't get any inkling of why she would be attracted to this guy at all, other than she does because she's the love interest in this movie. I've gone on and on about my hatred of voiceover in movies. For 2020, here's a new thing I hate in movies.
Ooh, the older man getting more angry at things. Let's see.
Oh, I'm turning into Clint Eastwood now? Great. It's not when the bad guy has a lot in common with the good guy, but it is when the bad guy tells the good guy, we're not so different, me and you. Ugh, I get it. Do you have to spell it out? The only exception is in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Belloc says it to Indy. That's okay. All other times when it happens, it annoys the crap out of me. There's a lot in this movie that annoys the crap out of me, and I'm going to say that it does not stand the test of time. Sorry, Clint Eastwood, I'm referring to, not Clint Howard, to make it clear. You looked a little confused. You were like, which Clint are you talking to? So that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we're going to be talking with our friend Aaron Newman. He's coming on the show to talk about Bad Boys. The following week, we'll do Bad Boys 2. There's a third Bad Boys coming out, Bad Boys for Life. So we're going to get our Bad Boys on.
I think it's actually Bad Boys 3 Life.
That would honestly make more sense. No, it wouldn't make more sense. It wouldn't make less sense, though. Anyway, in the meantime, you know where we are. We're at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, don't forget to write us a nice review on Apple Podcasts. We'll read it on the air, and also, we'll just appreciate it. So until next time, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.